Ghost in a Suit. I was once camping around the side of a mountain in the countryside with two of my friends. We brought some whiskey along and so on, and at one point around 2 o'clock in the morning, I decided to go for a walk on my own. The stars were out alongside the moon, and it was a wonderful calm night. I walked off into the direction of a forest, which was the top side of the mountain. The forest was incredibly isolated, miles away from anywhere, and it was made up of long, thin pine trees. It looked really daunting, but for some reason I was drawn to it. I checked around. I was about a mile and a half away from my friends at the tent. As I walked into the forest, I started to feel odd. I don't know if it was anything to do with the buzz from the whiskey earlier, or just my brain reacting oddly to the horror film external stimuli that I was being drawn to, but I did feel odd. I continued walking in a straight line, sliding between the pine trees and pushed forwards, deeper into the forest. Now it is at this point when something happened, and I still have no logical way to explain it. It certainly did happen, I'm sure of that, and it was not in my mind. I was deep in the forest, tired, and getting rather claustrophobic. My torch was having a few problems, and so I decided to turn back and meet up with my friends at camp. They had probably been passed out by now anyway, and now as I turned around to head out of the forest, I heard a slight noise. It got louder and louder and nearer and nearer. Then it stopped. Now at this point I was freaking out a little, but the noises were obviously just from deer or some form of wildlife, and so I paid no heed to it. I continued walking, but the noise returned, closer this time. I now stopped to listen for the second time, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I felt slightly off once again. It's important to visualize what this forest looked like, as it is an important part of what was to come. Incredibly dark, incredibly dense pine trees, close to one another. Not a lot of room. Stars were barely visible through the heights of the pines, and there was perpetual creaking from the breeze. If you were claustrophobic, you would not want to be here. I heard the noise again. I turned around and shone my torch into the deeper part of the woods. Nothing there. Empty. Unsettling. The old trees creaked again. Then the noise returned, the noise of movement. It's getting louder and louder, closer and closer, a kind of sickly scraping across the dead leaves on that forest floor. It's getting closer, almost as if it was coming towards me. I shone my torch again, and I stood deadly still. Then, across the yellow beams of my torch, about 4 feet in front of me, a man ran past me. I remember it clearly. He was wearing a suit, and he moved in a rather languid manner. He ran past me. I never saw his face. I shone my torch after him. I called after him in shock. I managed to follow him with the beam of my torch, but he ran with such speed and accuracy between the thick dark of the pine trees that I had no chance. He disappeared, and I never got a chance to see his face. It really freaks me out whenever I remember this. I was in the complete middle of nowhere, miles and miles away from society, at the back of a mountain. And before you ask, no, it wasn't one of my friends. They'd have owned up after a while, I know that. The man in the suit remains a complete mystery. I checked the newspaper the day after. No crimes committed. Nobody on the run. Just one witness. Me, to a suited man running through the pine forest in the dead of the night. The lady in the window. I was home alone for a weekend a few years ago while I was still in high school. After school one day I was driving home. When I passed in front of my house, I thought I saw some old lady in white clothes in my sister's room looking through the window. I thought it was odd, so I went in the room to check out what it was, but I couldn't find anything. I pretty much forgot about it until later that night I got a call from a very panicked and scared neighbor saying that there was some old lady pacing back and forth in my sister's room. I still have no idea what it was, who it was, and I've never seen anything like it since. Mother Ghost. My parents had just had their first child, my oldest sister, Kathy. They had been living in Italy at the time. My dad was in the Air Force, and had brought her back to the U.S. to introduce her to my grandparents, my dad's parents. So their first night there, my mom was asleep in the front bedroom, jet lagged. My dad had gone out to hang out with his brothers, and in the middle of the night, this woman walks into my mom's room, waking her up. She sits down on the bed and says, "Shh, it's okay. I just wanted to welcome you to our family." My mom was scared, obviously, but figured this was some relative or family friend or something that came over. The woman walks over to the bassinet where my baby sister was sleeping. "Is this your daughter?" My mom nodded. "She's so beautiful. It's lovely to meet you both." And then she leaves. My mom wakes up the next day and is having breakfast with my grandmother when she brings it up. "Who was the woman that came over last night?" My grandmother had no idea what she was talking about. My mom told her the whole story, and my grandmother asked what she looked like. My mom said, well, she was tall, had long white hair, thin, and was wearing a beautiful blue dress. My grandmother's face went as white as a sheet. She rummaged through some old pictures and pulled one out. "Is this her?" she asked my mom, who nodded yes in return. "That's my mother, and she's been dead for 20 years. We buried her in a blue dress."